In the last couple of lessons, we've been configuring layout 1 such that we can create a formal plot of this drawing. In this lesson, we will add a viewport to layout such that we can view and plot this floor plan at a measurable scale. Let's start by jumping out to layout 1. As you can see, it's just the way we left it. At this point, you may be wondering, where does this layout exist in relation to the drawing? Well, layouts sit on top of model space. In order to see our drawing, we need to cut a hole in this layout. That hole is called the viewport. Before I create the viewport, I'm going to add a layer to put the viewport on. To do that, I will come over to the Layer Properties Manager. I will click the New button and I will call this layer Viewport. I will then click the green check to set that layer current. To cut a hole in the paper, I'm going to come up the Layout tab, then in the Layout Viewports panel, I will click the Viewport Flyout and select Rectangular. I will then zoom in and click in the upper left corner of the drawing, and then I'll come down and click in the lower right to define the size of the viewport. By default, AutoCAD gives us a zoom extents view of our geometry within that view. To work in the viewport, I will put my cursor inside the boundary and double click. At this point, I can pan and zoom to work on the drawing. It's as though I'm reaching through the hole in the paper to work in model space. Now I don't need to see the grid in this view, it won't print. But I really don't need to see it on screen while I'm working. So I'm going to come down to the status bar and I will click the grid toggle to turn it off. Now to set the geometry in this view to a measurable scale, I'm going to come down to the viewport menu, and since I'm working with an architectural example, I will use the scales down here at the bottom. Let's try 1/16 inches equal to foot. That's not too bad. Let's go a little bit bigger and I'll try 3/32 of an inch equal to a foot. That looks like it will work perfectly. When I'm finished setting the scale, I'll make sure my cursor is outside the viewport boundary, and I'll double click to put my cursor back on the layout. Since this viewport represents a hole in the layout, I can select the viewport edge and use these grips to open or close this viewport, and expose as much or as little of the drawings as I like. One thing you need to be careful of, if you'd like to make changes to the floor plan geometry, it's best to do that by going back to the Model tab. You could double click inside the viewport and make changes to this geometry, but if you pan or zoom, you risk messing up the viewport scale. The only way to correct this is to come back to the viewport scale menu and reselect your scale. Let's center this again. One way you can protect yourself from yourself is after setting the scale, you can come down and click this yellow padlock to lock the viewport scale. From now on, if I pan or zoom, it will pan and zoom the entire sheet. The only way to change the viewport scale now is to come back and unlock this padlock. When I'm finished working inside the view, I can move my cursor outside the boundary and double click. Now you may be wondering why I put this viewport on its own layer. I do that because if I come back to the Home tab and turn this layer off, I can hide the viewport boundary. Now I am turning off the current layer. That's fine, as you can see that boundary no longer displays. To finish this up, I can zoom in on the lower right corner and adjust the text in the title block. For now, I will call this drawing Banquet Hall Floor Plan, and I'll revise the scale to 3/32 of an inch equals a foot. When I am finished, I will double click the mouse wheel to do a zoom extents. One of the best parts about creating a layout is that the drawings are very easy to print. Essentially, all the work is done for me. If I wanted to print this, I can come up and click Plot and then click OK. That's it. Since this drawing is configured to plot to a file, I'm going to save the file on the desktop. I will accept the default name and I will click Save. When the print is finished, I will right-click on the plot and Publish icon, and I'll choose View Plotted File. You can see an example of the finished plot on screen. When it comes to plotting, layouts are the most efficient way to print drawings. Remember that a layout represents saved print settings, so by configuring a layout, you can create formal plots with just 2 clicks of the mouse.